It was the plane so powerful, so revolutionary, it reshaped the world. Airlines worshipped it. Countries built airports around it. And passengers? They swore it felt like flying in a palace. However, behind the glory of the 747 lay a hidden truth, one that Boeing never wanted you to see. This is the untold story of how the greatest plane ever made became a billion-dollar burden. The late 1960s was a turbulent time for aviation. Jet travel was booming, but the world's airlines were already straining to keep up with passenger demand. Boeing, which had just lost out on a military transport contract to Lockheed, found itself with an engineering team and no project. Rather than play it safe, the company made a bet so bold it nearly destroyed them: to build the largest passenger aircraft the world has ever seen. This wasn't just another airplane. This was an attempt to redefine what air travel could be. The project's price tag was staggering, about $1 billion in the 1960s, the equivalent of over $10 billion today. Boeing even had to build an entirely new factory, the Everett plant outside Seattle, which still holds the record as the largest building in the world by volume. At 472 million cubic feet, it was so massive that workers joked that its own weather system could form inside. Leading the charge was Joe Sutter, an engineer who became known as the father of the 747. He and a group of designers, later nicknamed the Incredibles, had just 16 months to turn this unprecedented concept into a real flying machine. What they produced was unlike anything seen before. On February 9, 1969, the first Boeing 747 lifted off from Payne Field, its enormous frame casting a shadow over the crowd of engineers and journalists below. It was more than an engineering milestone, it was a statement. Boeing was announcing to the world that aviation's future would no longer be defined by limits. When Pan Am introduced the 747 into commercial service in January 1970 on its New York to London route, it felt less like boarding an airplane and more like stepping into the future. Passengers had never seen anything like it. 2 aisles, wide cabins, and seating for more than 440 travelers at a time, more than double what the Boeing 707 could carry. Airlines and passengers were stunned. This wasn't just a jet, it was a flying palace. Some early models featured cocktail lounges and spiral staircases, while first-class sections on certain airlines were fitted with pianos. For the average traveler, ticket prices dropped as airlines could suddenly spread costs over hundreds of additional passengers. In a single stroke, the 747 had democratized long-distance flying. The impact rippled across the globe. Airports scrambled to adapt. Longer runways were built, new terminals rose, and jet bridges were redesigned to reach its towering fuselage. In New York, TWA spent $20 million just expanding its JFK terminal wing to handle the jumbo jet. Countries from Japan to Germany began reshaping their national airports simply to accommodate this machine. And the cultural shock was just as profound. For the first time in history, the world felt smaller. Families who once considered Europe or Asia unreachable could now fly there affordably. But the 747 wasn't just an airliner, it was a symbol. A statement of modernity, power, and prestige. To fly on one was to take part in a new era of human connection. The Queen of the Skies had arrived, and the world would never look the same. By the mid-1970s, the Boeing 747 was more than just a successful airplane. It had become a cultural icon. Airlines lined up to buy them, not just because they needed the extra seats, but because having a 747 in your fleet was a badge of honor. If an airline wanted to be taken seriously on the world stage, it needed a jumbo jet parked at its gate. In its first decade, orders flooded in from airlines across North America, Europe, and Asia. Boeing had tapped into something bigger than they imagined: the globalization of travel. A trip that once felt elite, something reserved for diplomats, business tycoons, and Hollywood stars, was suddenly within reach of the middle class. For the first time, an average family could dream of crossing the Atlantic. Inside the cabin, it felt like luxury redefined. The sheer width of the twin-aisle cabin allowed airlines to experiment with designs no one thought possible. Some carriers turned the upper deck into exclusive lounges where first-class passengers sipped champagne under soft mood lighting. Others added cocktail bars mid-cabin. Qantas even had a Captain Cook lounge, a kind of airborne club space. For passengers, the 747 wasn't just transportation, it was an event. But its influence went beyond passenger experience. The 747's enormous payload capacity made it equally transformative for cargo. It could carry everything from cars to horses to priceless art pieces across continents in one non-stop hop. Later, it would even ferry NASA's space shuttle strapped to its back, a sign that became one of the defining images of American aerospace power. Production ramped up quickly, By the early 1980s, Boeing was delivering 747s at a steady pace, and they seemed destined to dominate the skies forever. Over the aircraft's lifetime, more than 1,574 units were built, with versions ranging from the early 100 models to the stretched, more powerful 747-400, which entered service in 1989, and eventually the fuel-optimized 747-8. Launched in 2005 with its first delivery in 2012. Each generation pushed the limits of range and efficiency further, cementing the jumbo jet's dominance. And governments took notice too. The United States selected the 747 to serve as Air Force One, projecting American power in a way no smaller jet ever could. In crisis scenarios, 747s even served as doomsday planes, mobile command centers designed to survive nuclear war. Few aircraft in history that ever had such wide-ranging influence: a passenger jet, a cargo lifter, a presidential palace in the sky, and even a military fortress. For nearly 3 decades, the Queen of the Skies was unrivaled. It wasn't just the backbone of global aviation, it was its beating heart. But even empires have limits, and as the new millennium approached, cracks in the 747's crown began to show. On the surface, the 747 looked unstoppable. It was the face of air travel, the jet that carried presidents, popes, and millions of ordinary travelers around the globe. But beneath the prestige was a growing problem, one that would eventually prove fatal. The 747 was big, powerful, and beautiful, but it was also expensive to operate. Its 4 engines consumed far more fuel than the new generation of twin-engine jets that started appearing in the 1990s. The Boeing 777, introduced in 1994, offered nearly the same range and capacity as a 747, but with only 2 engines, making it cheaper to fly and easier to maintain. Airbus followed with the A330 and later the A350, further shifting the economics of long-haul travel. Airlines were quick to notice. A 747 might carry more people, but if you couldn't fill those seats, it turned into a money pit. Smaller, more efficient planes could fly point-to-point routes, bypassing the big hub airports that the 747 was designed for. The very design philosophy that made it revolutionary was becoming outdated in a world that now preferred flexibility and efficiency. Then came the environmental pressures. 4 roaring jet engines were not only costly, but noisy and polluting. Governments and regulators began tightening noise and emission rules, further increasing costs for operators. By the 2000s, the once unstoppable Queen of the Skies was losing her crown to sleeker, greener rivals. Still, Boeing tried to fight back. The 747-400, introduced in 1989, extended range and improved fuel burn. In 2012, Boeing delivered the first 747-8, stretching the fuselage and fitting it with modern engines. But it was too late. The world had already moved on. Orders trickled in slowly, and production numbers dropped year by year. The death blow came with the pandemic. Airlines were already phasing out their fleets, but when COVID-19 grounded international travel in 2020, the 747 was the first to go. British Airways retired its entire jumbo jet fleet that year. Delta had already retired its last passenger 747s in 2017. By 2022, most airlines had retired them, with only a handful, most notably Lufthansa and Korean Air, still flying them into the 2020s. The global fleet of passenger 747s shrank to fewer than 50 planes, a shadow of its former glory. And yet, even as it faded from passenger service, the 747 found a second life in cargo. Its cavernous belly and nose-loading door made it perfect for hauling oversized freight. Atlas Air, UPS, and Cargo Lux kept ordering freighters. But while that kept the production line alive a little longer, it was clear that the 747 had transformed from an icon of mass travel into a niche workhorse. The truth was undeniable. The plane that once reshaped the world had become a burden, too costly, too heavy, too tied to an era that no longer existed. On January 31st, 2023, a quiet chapter in aviation history came to a close. At Boeing's massive Everett factory, the same building that had been constructed in the 1960s just to house the 747's assembly line, the very last jumbo jet rolled out. It was a 747-8 freighter destined for Atlas Air. Workers, engineers, and executives gathered in the hangar as the final plane left the line, and many had tears in their eyes. After more than 5 decades of production and 1,574 deliveries, the Queen of the Skies had officially retired from her throne. But even as the last aircraft left Everett, the 747's story wasn't ending, it was transforming. Atlas Air remains the largest operator of 747 freighters, and cargo airlines around the world still rely on its unmatched ability to haul massive payloads. The nose door, which allows for loading oversized cargo, is something no other wide-body freighter offers with the same efficiency. Whether it's transporting emergency relief supplies, luxury cars, or even space equipment, the 747 is still a workhorse of global commerce. The numbers behind its career are staggering. Across its lifetime, the 747 logged more than 118 million flight hours and nearly 23 million flight cycles. It carried billions of passengers, shrinking the world in a way no other plane ever had. From the very first Pan Am service in 1970 to its final passenger flights in 2020, the jumbo jet wasn't just a means of travel, it was part of the collective memory of modern aviation. And culturally, its imprint's possible to erase. It was the plane that carried astronauts returning from the moon, the jet that hosted presidents and popes, the aircraft that appeared in countless films and books as the symbol of long-haul travel. It represented power, progress, and possibility. For millions of travelers, their first glimpse of a 747 on the tarmac was a symbol of adventure, a promise that the world was waiting just beyond the horizon. Even in retirement, its DNA lives on. Every modern wide-body aircraft, from the 777 to the Airbus A380, was inspired by the bold gamble Boeing took in the 1960s. And though those later jets may be more efficient, none have ever captured the imagination in quite the same way. So yes, the 747 eventually became a burden. Its size, its fuel burn, its complexity, all of it doomed it in a new world of efficiency and flexibility. But calling it a failure would miss the point. Boeing's 747 wasn't just a plane. It was the aircraft that changed air travel forever. The Queen of the Skies may have left the stage, but her legacy will always fly. Do you think there's any other plane that could match the aura of the 747? Let us know in the comments. Also hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on our new videos. See you in the next one.